The Micro Effect. www.themicroeffect.com.
You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
There was a mighty nation, blessed above all of creation. It was a rare and precious pearl, conceived in faith and liberty, home of the brave, land of the free. It was the envy of the world. But this shining city on a hill has turned from the Creator's will and let evil take control. Now the reckless men who lead them want to strip away their freedom and to steal their very soul. Now it's smoke and mirrors, switching bait, criticize and confiscate and let the guilty walk away. In this once righteous, godly nation, in the halls of education, they forbid a child to pray. They say we need to spread the wealth. They pretend to guard the health of the feeble and the poor, while the hand they hold behind their back confuses and conceals the fact that the wolf is at the door. There's an unseen hand that pulls the string.
Well, good morning, America. This is Dan Happel again for another round of Connecting the Dots, and I want to thank our listeners for the support you've been giving us on this network and on this radio program. Without your support, we cannot survive, and you've been stepping up, and I really appreciate everything you've done. So please continue to support us any way you can and spread the word, because we are certainly spreading the truth all over the world with this podcast, and it is becoming very, very effective. This morning we're doing a program with Bruce Moran. Bruce has been on this radio program before, but we've been seeing all the things that are going on in the FISA reports and the Mueller report and all the machinations that have happened throughout the country. And, between the power elite and trying to figure any way they can to discredit our president and destroy his presidency. And we're going to be talking about all that. We're going to be talking about the FISA report. We're going to be talking about what's been happening in our country with the deep state. Bruce is someone who is extremely well-versed on this whole process. He's part of the national security infrastructure. He is involved with the administration. He's doing reports to Congress. He's doing work with the administration, and he's been really digging deep to find exactly what the truth is. There's some limits on what he can disclose until he gets through some of these hearings, but he certainly can answer a lot of our questions. The second hour, we're going to be joined by Claire Lopez, and Claire is a former CIA section chief who has been writing and doing work to try to expose the New World Order. She is part of a group out of Washington, D.C. that is really exposing all this information. It's called the Center for Security Policy, and they are trying to bring America back and make the Trump presidency exactly as successful as he intended for it to be. And frankly, the deep state has been doing everything in their power to try to stop him. I think those of us who are really, really understanding what's been happening to this country and happening around the world realize there is a worldwide movement and really turned on high gear in the United States to force us into a one-world, socialist, Marxist, technocratic government that controls everything we do from the grave. And the deep state players who are literally the traitors who have been in our government and have been destroying the American exceptionalism and our brand of freedom from the inside out. And these people need to be held accountable, and we need to see this whole process change, or we are going to lose our country. In any case, Bruce, are you on the call?
Yes, I am, sir.
Okay.
And,
thank you. And I want you to maybe give a little bit more background on what you and Chuck Floyd are working on, and a little bit on your background. I can't do you justice.
Well, we work under the guise of Security Solutions Technology. We do cybersecurity work. We do full-fledged work with the Congress, with the White House, and various other sundry organizations, the Heritage Foundation, ATR, other organizations that help support the New Freedom Caucus. As you know, they're fighting tooth and nail themselves. Congress itself has its innate problems, and what you are speaking of and what you alluded to is how we are working to redefine and accomplish what has been compromised in our national security across the board. And as we look at the FISA warrants themselves, the FISA court, those who submitted the FISA warrants, that's pretty much how things have gone wrong. What my purpose is to help elucidate on is the origins of the FISA court information. I think we need to look there. As we saw yesterday, Lou Dobbs and Tom Fitton from Judicial Watch, who's a friend of ours, they were talking about meetings which took place between President Obama, Joe Biden, James Comey, and National Security Advisor Susan Rice. That could be, one of the directions that they will go. Nunes had offered 8 particular areas of concentration, and I am more inclined, because of our background, to look at the tactical operations that were in place and who was doing what, when, where, why, and to what extent. And what does that mean? That means who was involved in the FISA court prior to what was called Operation Crossfire Hurricane. Once President Trump was on board as the candidate and president-elect, then transition team, then as president, Operation Crossfire Hurricane went into full effect. And that was also known as Spygate, and how we're looking at the entire picture. If you look at what was done and how things were prepared and who prepared them, that is the question that first comes to mind. Who was Christopher Steele? Where was he from? Who else was he working with? Where did his funding come from? Were other GOP candidates under fire at that point? And once President Trump, or President-elect Trump, became the candidate that people thought would be the most probable one to face off against Hillary Clinton, then Operation Crossfire Hurricane came into effect. But what happened before that? That's the question. How was the FISA court used? Samantha Powers had suggested that she didn't sign off on many of the FISA warrants. So what happened there? What is the transparency that needs to be done to find out who, what, when, where, or why, to what effect was the FISA court used at that time? And maybe, somebody like Jeb Bush or Ted Cruz or others who are running, Lindsey Graham, were under that web also. So that's, getting back to the genesis of what was happening prior to Crossfire Hurricane, if that makes sense what I'm saying.
Yeah, Bruce, I fully plan to go through a whole list of these items. One thing you had mentioned to me when we were talking off air last week was that one thing we don't want to do is we don't want to follow any conspiracy theories. Well, I fully agree with that. The fact is there's so many conspiracies out there now that we don't need to follow theories. We've got all these facts going to be laid out in front of us. And that's exactly what you can do over the next 2 hours, you and Claire. And what I want you to do, I mean, there are probably a few listeners that don't really fully understand the FISA process and what FISA courts are. And so I would like you to kind of describe what the FISA courts are, why they were created, and then let's talk about the different types of FISA courts, because there are different types of FISA courts, and you pointed that out in the article that you wrote.
Yes. We were talking about the two warrants. There's a FISA Title Warrant 1 and a FISA Title Warrant 7. Now, why did they issue a Title 1 warrant versus a Title 7 warrant? Because it gives them unfettered access to use the government in any way possible to target a spy. Now, was Carter Page a spy? Evidently, they're looked at it as such. So what could they do? Anybody who associated with Carter Page could be investigated. Anybody associated with anybody else?
Okay, now Bruce,
could also be under.
Yeah, Bruce, I don't want to. I don't want to interrupt, but I want you to tell our listeners what the FISA courts were established for, so that we can set the groundwork for this whole radio show. Why did we get FISA courts in the first place?
For counterintelligence purposes.
And then we can talk about the different type of FISA warrants.
Yeah, it's for counterintelligence purposes. That's the basic foundation for counterintelligence actions taken by the U.S. government, and the FBI goes in and asks for a warrant to do their investigation and spying, surveillance, counter-espionage work on particular individuals.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good.
It's counterintelligence, basically.
And you said there are two different...
as 9/11 happened, we had the Patriot Act and all these things evolved. Is that what you're asking? And the FISA court itself is a secret court. Only the agents go before it, and people who are part of the Department of Justice and request the FISA warrant. So nobody really knows what goes into the FISA court except those particular individuals from the Department of Justice and the FBI for this particular issue we're talking about. And then they have to substantiate, give evidence that a warrant is justified. So they had a dossier from Christopher Steele, who was a former MI6 Russian specialist agent. So that constituted part of the findings to issue a warrant. When the warrant was unfounded and didn't have substantial basis for it, was from the dossier, which constituted a way to look into what was going on in the counterintelligence area. So everything was null and void from the get-go, and that's what you might be referring to? I'm not sure.
I'm going to kind of build this whole thing so that our listeners can understand how this whole process kind of evolved. And so we started out with the FISA court, why it was created, but it was for counterintelligence, and it was created to make sure that things that were, contrary to American policy and American interests and the American Constitution. We can't forget the U.S. Constitution is the foundation for all of this. but to make sure that outside interests could not destroy our republic. And so that's basically what it was for. It was established to allow the intelligence community to find out information on Americans as well as others. I guess Americans are the primary focus of this, but who are involved in activities that are anti-American, in not the best interests of our country. Okay, is that a legit
Yes,
statement?
aiding and abetting the enemy would be one. Acting in a line of treason, that would be other ways of looking at it.
Right. Okay, well, I'm doing what you asked me to. I'm not going to go down any conspiracy theories. We're going to build a case for this whole investigation and how it is really, the FISA warrants that were issued that were attacking the president and members of the administration are really built on a foundation of jello, because there really isn't any reason for most of this to have happened. So, okay, we're there. Now let's, you were talking about the Warrant 1 FISA report, which allows virtually unlimited access to every bit of information. That's what was used when they established this FISA warrant. And you mentioned Christopher Steele, but let's talk about how this case was built supposedly against President Trump.
There are various sundry things we can talk about. You looked at his national security advisor, Michael Flynn, and that's who was brought under the scope of this investigation. Everything they looked at regarding the courts, regarding the background, everything was unfounded. And Michael Flynn was the backbone of getting the president's national security team off the ground. What they did is basically cripple President Trump at the beginning of his staffing of his cabinet, and that's insidious kind of behavior. If we look at and let's keep in mind at the time when he was doing that, we were dealing with the ISIS Caliphate state. We were dealing with Syria, Assad, Russia. We were dealing with the Christian minority genocide. We were dealing with Afghanistan stability operations. We were dealing with the Syrian-Iraq refugee crisis, Middle East immigration issues. There's a whole host of things that the National Security Council does to support President Trump. If you knock his legs out from him at the beginning, then you're trying to cripple him from being commander-in-chief. Is that pretty straightforward enough?
Yeah, and I think, Bruce, you and I have talked about this, but the fact is, as I alluded to early in the conversation, there are forces in our government that we call the deep state who are fully embedded in the concept of one world, socialist, Marxist, technocratic government, and those forces have got a lot more traction and have inserted themselves much deeper in our government than I think almost any of us realized. I certainly didn't realize that. So what I want to do is I want to build the case for all this. So let's talk about Christopher Steele. Let's get started at the beginning. Who authorized and issued the FISA warrants to investigate candidate Donald Trump, and what was the basis for those warrants? And then that'll get us into the discussion about Christopher Steele.
As you know, the dossier was part of the DNC and Bruce Orr and his wife and other people who had orchestrated, these were orchestrated a way to have a justification for a warrant for the FISA court using a foreign agent, former British spy, Christopher Steele. He worked for the Orbis Corporation. If you're looking at what we just look up front, it's Fusion GPS. That's what everybody talks about. But what was Christopher Steele doing in his own business operations? What was his own network? How did he obtain information, whether true or false or misinformation for the FISA warrant? How was that information disseminated in Europe and at the Halifax conference in Nova Scotia? Those are questions that need to be answered. Those are questions that draw in other people to the larger picture of the sphere of influence in what we call 5E, 14 Eyes, and how other intelligence networks could have been supporting the use of their networks to work against the President of the United States. So you got different spheres of influence, and who are supporting these efforts, who are looking at to undermine what the President is doing. And as you saw at the beginning, they were looking to prove him to be incompetent in the 25th Amendment, or they wanted to have him impeached. All these different angles come under what you call crossfire. They are using any means and methods to try to figure out a way to get him to not be President of the United States.
Okay, and that's basically a really good lead-in. We know that Christopher Steele has a bit of a shaky background. We also know from the reports, and I want you to verify this, that the Clinton campaign had paid Christopher Steele to put together this dossier. And this dossier...
Well, you're assuming that, and that is true, but there could have been other dark monies coming in from other sources to support the larger network he deals with. That's what I'm trying to convey.
Good. Well, that's exactly what we're looking for. Exactly that. Okay, go ahead.
See, that's the key question. And were those monies also used to look into, say, Jeb Bush, Lindsey Graham, before President-elect Trump became the nominee for the Republican Party? See, that's the key essence here. What was going on before and what happened during and what happened once Crossfire Hurricane was basically established. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Okay, good. So if we're looking at this, there are different networks that work with the U.S. and the intelligence community. And they can be called upon through plausible deniability purposes to work, to find out information about people who worked on the campaign. Now, if you have a FISA Title I warrant, you can go anytime, any place, anywhere to find out anything you want. So you can call upon these networks, and they go deep. And they've known each other for 20, 30 years all throughout Europe and Russia. They know where to look and create what you might call a illusionary dossier in order to gain traction to find out further information. Now, as you know, the unmasking process itself was done with Samantha Powers, and she couldn't verify many of the unmasking capabilities that happened. So there's my major concern, because we're talking about, it's just not the president or his cabinet or his staff or his family, which is definitely a major problem in national security, but it takes the Constitution moorings and throws them out the door, because it violates each and every one of our individual rights, freedoms, and liberties. So who was part of the unmasking, and where did it go, and how was it coming about? That's a critical part. Now, if you look at A.G. William Barr's focus, they'll be looking into the immediate areas. But then if they want to go into this larger intelligence, I will call it breach of the United States Constitution and national security, then you have to look into all these component spheres of influence, which are under many plausible deniabilities. But you also have our NSA that records all the information. So if you want to access that and find out who did what time, when, where, and to what extent prior to Operation Crossfire, you have the capabilities of going there.
Okay, that.
I mean, it's more complicated than that.
Let me ask you this, Bruce. Let me ask you this. We hear about the operation. Well, we hear about Orbis Security Corporation,
yes,
and we hear about Fusion GPS.
Yep.
And we also hear the term about the Operation Crossfire Hurricane.
Yes,
and what I want to do is I want to tie all these groups together with Christopher Steele and what exactly was in that dossier, or at least, to the best of your knowledge, and how was that used as a tool against President Trump?
Well, he discredited himself because he's working with the FBI, and he released information in the news networks. But they kept using the dossier for further warrants. So there was something upstream that was not credible in the first place. You have to ask Baker about his understanding that the warrants weren't even justifiable in the first place. So you didn't have proper evidence given to the FISA courts from the get-go, and then as they kept getting future warrants, it created a larger and larger base to work from, because more warrants gives you more capability to do more spying. Now, do you get how it worked?
Yeah, I see exactly how that works. So
if you don't have a basis for your
Christopher Steele's original dossier, which was called Fusion GPS dossier, is that right?
Yes, that was partly, the DNC, yes. There's Simpson in there and other individuals. They were talking about it last night. I'm trying to keep away from the information people know. I'm trying to get them into the intelligence side of how insidious this was and how corrupt it was and how treacherous it was for President Trump. And our individual liberties, freedoms, and rights. Every one of us could have been part of this whole scheme of things when it goes awry. And what you were talking about earlier as your introductory to the show, it becomes a big brother controlling a lot of the ways people are going to be doing their business in the United States of America, which usurps, undermines, and circumvents the U.S. Constitution.
Right, exactly. And that's kind of what we're doing with this radio program now. Understand, Bruce, there's a lot of people. You've got a lot of information, and you and I have talked about this, and we incidentally did put your report that you and Chuck had done out when we sent out our announcement for this radio show. But there are going to be a lot of people on this radio show listening that don't really understand the whole cast of characters. So what I'm trying to do is have you build the cast of characters from how it got started and then how all these different people became part of this process. That way we've got a really clear understanding going from A to B to C. In other words, connecting the dots between all these players and how this corrupt process just grew like topsy. So that's what I'm trying to get from you, and I appreciate your patience with me on that, but I want to build it step by step so that our listeners really understand how this whole thing kind of turned into the mess that it is.
Well, let's go back to the original genesis of Crossfire Hurricane, and you can probably look at what happened in the investigative community And
Bruce, we're moving into a break, but that'll give you a chance to think about this a little bit. We'll pick it up on the other side of the break, and we'll build this case for why the FISA courts suck. Okay. Welcome back to Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel. Today, my guest for the first hour and the second hour on this radio program is Bruce Moran. And Bruce was building really the background for the whole investigation that's become known as the Operation Crossfire Hurricane against President Donald Trump, and why it was really such a nefarious group of people and whole program that put this thing together. Bruce, I want to give you a chance to go ahead and finish your thoughts and put that whole process together for our listeners.
My major concern was the spying that was going on against President Trump, and if it included our FISA network, that's our intelligence groups in other countries were used as part of that network of spying, and they used their internal clandestine operations all the way down to their informants to try to find information on President Trump, the cabinet, Michael Flynn, Carter Page, you name it, anybody on the campaign, George Papadopoulos, who was involved with the campaign. That FISA Title I warrant gives them that opportunity to do that. That's what I was trying to convey. Once you're in the FISA Title I warrant, you can do anything, anytime, any place, anywhere, searching. It takes away the rights you have as an individual American citizen to search and seizure. You lose all your rights under the Fourth Amendment. That's what's critical about this. Then if you have our intelligent networks and their communities in Europe working on this all the way down to their informants, then you have a large scale of, I would say, spying going on to try to find information and trap, like they did with Michael Flynn and not with Carter Page. They didn't charge him with anything, but George Papadopoulos, set them up in so many different ways that you wouldn't think is possible.
Right. Well, and that's exactly what you're describing with this FISA Type 1 warrant is a casting a broad net. In other words, just hoping that they can catch enough fish in there by casting this broad net to make a case. It's really kind of an open-ended fishing trip.
No, it's more than a fishing trip. They know how to trap you in the net and make it look like you are part of a treacherous and compromise you. That's what happens. Then you plead guilty.
Okay, good.
It's different than what you're saying. It's not a fishing expedition. It's the capability to entrap you and to get you into a setting where it looks like you're doing something that's aiding and abetting the enemy. Or to justify it in a way. There's a big difference. And that's why I'm really concerned about individual sovereign rights and the Fourth Amendment guarantees of search and seizure and how we're protected. This is much more deeper than most people are realizing. They need to understand that how this happened, and A.G. Barr can take a look at that. I think William Barr is well aware of the many degrees of espionage that can go on, but to look into the technical parts, that's more the thing that I can discuss, what could have happened, but I don't know. We know things happen, and they are insidious, and what can happen when the CIA can bug anything, a phone, computer, your HVAC system. They can come in on your printer, on your turned off computer. They can turn it on, all kinds of different things. So they connect your phone to your computer, to your printer. They come in and extrapolate information, take control of your desktop, and mimic you.
Sure. They can set you up, in other words,
they know what
and
you're
do it
doing,
in
how
a way
you're
that
doing
looks
it,
completely credible.
Yeah, it goes beyond that because they can mimic everything you do and act like, they call it proxy cybersecurity. They can pretend you're a agent of another country, hacking into somebody through the way
that's absolutely amazing. Bruce, we've got a caller that's been hanging on, wants to ask you a question. Would you take a question from a caller?
Sure.
Okay. Caller, welcome to the radio program. Please identify yourself and please ask your question.
Well, good day, Dan. Good day, Bruce. Yeah, my question is, we certainly do have a well-entrenched, powerful, enemy, the deep state or whatever. But my question for you, Bruce, is, do we have an alliance, hopefully a growing alliance, of people that are qualified in the law? Like there's a guest that Dan recently had on, Mr. Winters. I think his name was Bruce Allen Winters. He's known as the common lawyer, the natural lawyer. Do we have a group of people that are prepared to oppose these fish traps you were just talking about, Bruce, where, when someone constructs this sort of a trap, or a weapon against a person, whether they be, the president, an American citizen, or just a regular person, do we have any lawyers, good ones, that have the Fourth Amendment in mind, and are they being, arrayed against these kind of people, or are they kind of like, not as nearly as well organized as our deep state people are? That's my question.
Well, you asked four different questions. Do we have people that are capable? Yes. Are they in office? No. We have 500 openings in Class C positions that need to be filled in the Trump administration, haven't been filled in the last 2.5, 3 years. We have another 3,000 vacancies to support those efforts you're talking about. And we also have what's called the administrative state that people push back in the different departments and agencies. That's what you're also talking about. So those vacancies, those 3,000 vacancies and those 500 positions in the Class C, and what you're also talking about, will they be able to fill them in a Justice Department? And that's what your key question is. Will they be able to understand the Constitution? And the other question is, how will they be able to be, and this will be with Congress, how will the Congress and the Supreme Court come to understand how the FISA court is to be with oversight and review? Does that give you some inkling of answering your question?
Yes, sir. I'm glad that there is an alliance, and I just want to know how, me, a regular common man kind of a person, can help them be more able to oppose and defeat.
Who are your congressmen and our senators, and get everybody appointed. We have 500 people in those Class C positions. Those are, undersecretaries. They need to come in and support President Trump in policy and programs. Those you're talking about.
Very good. I thank you, Bruce, and I thank you for giving me a chance to air that question, Dan. Good day to you both.
God bless you.
Well,
Happy
thank you.
Easter to you.
Bruce, that's an excellent point of the question by the caller. The deep state, how deep is the deep state? And I think you have a pretty good feel for that. The fact that even members of the GOP that are supposed to be supporting our president have been part of the process that's been trying to bring him down. And I want you to, talk about how deep the deep state really is.
Well, the only way to counter what you would call a deep state or the bureaucratic state or what I call the Machiavellian kleptocrats or the beholden to the deep state is to have President Trump gain his power as commander-in-chief. and that is to put people in office to support him. And then they will eventually have to move on. They're staying there, and they're fighting him tooth and nail in those positions that were given to them for 10, 15, 20 years. They need to go on. They're beholden to different groups of people, and special interests. And you can't name all of them and to what degree they are, but, I think what you see is the New Freedom Caucus, and they're standing up, Meadows and, Jordan, and they're letting their voices be heard. And Nunes, this is where we're going with it. We're just at the initial stages of trying to find out what is going to be done and who's to be called on a rug for all this. And I would like, as I'm saying this to you, is to go into larger view of influences, strategical and tactical operations of the intelligence community, and see what was actually done. That's where the insidious behavior happens. That has to be checked, cross-checked, and counter-checked in the DNI office of the Chief Information Officer. And that's a different animal because we have everything at our disposal. We're the most dynamic intelligence agency in the world. We have everything at our disposal. But if it's used for insidious purposes against the President of the United States, then we have a huge problem that there hasn't been any checks, cross-checks, and counter-checks within the DNI itself and the CIO, who would oversee those people who are having abnormal operations or are risking us in a different way or larger exposures. I hope that makes sense. If I'm talking.
Yeah, Bruce, what I want to do is, and we're doing a great job. You're doing a great job of building the case. But what I want to do is try to figure out how this whole process got so far off base. I know you mentioned in your report that the CIA was doing investigations against committees of the Senate. The CIA doesn't have any business in domestic surveillance, or at least that certainly is part of their mandate. Aren't a lot of these agencies completely out of control?
That's what I was talking about. The head of all the investigative agencies and their ability to function, the function of the CIA is to function abroad, the function of the FBI is to do domestic protection of our country. Once the CIA crossed that border with John Brennan, then you had a problem. And that's when the Democratic senator at that time, Udall, said that he should have been fired from his position as CIA director. So that goes back, until him investigating the Senate, and that is pretty bad,
Yeah, well, especially since it wasn't the FBI, it wasn't domestic, it was the CIA. I'll tell you the truth, I think the CIA is a completely rogue agency that's completely out of control, and the best thing they could do is get rid of it and start over.
I'm going to argue with you on that one. Now we have Gina Haspel in there. She's a career officer, counterintelligence. She knows what she's doing. She can help understand and get to the bottom of some of these things that happen in this FISA court warrant kind of information. Once you have somebody in there that's not working against you, that can help Attorney General William Barr disclose information, and you can go to the Chief Information Officer, the CIA, and look at what happened, and go to the actual NSA communications and find out. That's where you need to go. That's what I was talking about earlier. So let me explain to you what I was trying to convey. Maybe I wasn't getting the message across clear enough. So what you need to do is have the DNI, it's a department, our Defense National Intelligence Director, the CIO institute stringent checks, cross-checks, and counter-checks on access controls and monitoring policies of the CIA, FBI, NSA, privileged users, while reporting technical abnormalities, various risks and exposure and abuses to Congress. That's outright what you were talking about. We need transparency, we need responsibility standards in place, we need accountability. The second part of this would be have the DNICO have internal audits, use security checks, cross-checks, and counter-checks on information and event management. It's called SIM systems, to log, monitor, and audit CIA, FBI, NSA employee actions while reporting technical abnormalities, various risks and exposures and abuses to Congress. I think that's what you're getting at. How are you going to address this? That's one way. There could be other ways that Congress can come up with, and the executive branch and President Trump. That's one way to do it. You need to audit any abnormal activities that are taking place, and then it will include the FISA court and who's doing what, when, where, why, to what extent. Because that's our constitutional mores that are being thrown out the door, usurped and undermined of the U.S. Constitution. That's what I didn't like at all. When you're getting into the weeds, you got to get into how to correct it with checks, cross-checks, and counter-checks. Those are normal procedures that are normally done, but were thrown out the window. And how is Congress now going to deal with it? How is... because you have Lindsay going in there and doing an investigation, you have Nunes going there, and then you have Attorney General Barr going in there. So and Horowitz is coming out with his findings. So you have all these different areas to discuss, but then you need to draw up plans how to monitor this all, which is actually oversight, and don't give oversight to the executive branch, because that's what happened in the first place. Nobody was doing the correct and proper fitting moorings of the Constitution, and they're using it in a conspiratorial manner. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, Bruce, I absolutely, and I think what you're getting at is how this administration has been completely hamstrung from the very beginning, even before the president took office. But we've got less than 2 years left in his first term. Hopefully it'll be his first term, and there'll be others after it. But I see the people like Alexandria Cortez
open vacancies to support him.
Yeah,
that's critical right now, and that'll help make a foundation for his policy and programs to go forward. I mean, not just now, but in the next year after this. It's going to take about at least a year to get all those people on board. And then you got the last year where he's going to be running for office and all other things are going to be happening. So let's try to get him situated in his position as commander-in-chief where he can run the country and not be concerned about his own executive branch coming at him and stopping his programs and cutting him short.
Yeah,
that's pretty straightforward.
This whole process, Bruce, is, frankly, I mean, the deep state's been pretty successful in, creating a hailstorm for the president, and it's not justified in many ways because what we're looking at is really obfuscation and trying to destroy his administration from being a America First administration, and that's really what it boils down to. These globalists, boy howdy, are they intent on driving us into the New World Order, and I don't think there's any question about that. Is there?
Well, we have 30 years of running the government a certain way. President Trump comes in, and he's going to change it all around, and they just don't like it. You can call them deep state, you can call them swamp, you can call them bureaucrats, technocrats, you can call them anything you want. But he's trying to change a whole system and change the ship around and right it for the Constitution, for the people of the United States. And that's a whole different idea. Ideologically is what the founders wanted, and I think that's what you're saying, but that's not what happened in the last 30, 40 years. and made a complete switch to where government is taking control of people's lives in a way that's not right. And it's infringing on our individual rights, freedoms, and liberties. I don't know how to say it any differently unless I go into the administrative state, the procedural state, and how the interagencies affect the way corporations or entrepreneurs or farmers and ranchers try to get things done. They can't, because the pushback is so hard because of the interagency administrative state. I saw one of our colleagues on Fox talking about just the educational system, but the educational system is just a small part of what needs to be corrected, and how it is legally bound and professionally bound and science bound, that it gives people power that are not elected officials to have say over our citizens' rights. I hope that's hard to explain, because I know what's going on, and it's effective in the federal level, the municipal level, and the state level. It's a highly integrated administrative pushback on individual rights and freedoms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, your comment about it being a technocratic state is it's really exactly what it is. It's a technocratic state that has evolved over a period of time, and they have become a force unto themselves. I mean, our three branches of government were never intended to be an administrative state that could control all the other branches of government. That was never intended.
No, and Congress gave up its oversight right to that administrative state. And the Supreme Court sometimes rules in favor of the executive branch over Congress. They're saying they don't have the capabilities to do what the executive branch does. And Congress should never have given up those rights in the first place for oversight.
Right.
And then you have them having protracted litigation, and nobody can go up against the government that has interagency rulings and protracted litigation. And it's hard unless you're a corporation and you have a whole legal staff. No entrepreneur, no small company, no intermediate company in the United States of America, no farmer, rancher, no matter how big you are and who you know, it's not going to help you. You're caught in a quagmire of legalese and administrative state procedures that it's going to just wear you down. And we've been, working with people on this.
Right.
Try to bring some of this up to the Supreme Court. That's what I can't talk about.
Well, Bruce, you mentioned that you can't fight Big Brother, and they're certainly proving that in the court system. One of the things that we're seeing with the court system is that, like the Hage family in Nevada, they won several of their court cases against the federal government, but the government just has unlimited resources, which are our tax dollars that they're operating with, and they continue to drag out the whole process until they bankrupt the family. That's just the way they work.
That's right. That's one. Yeah, that's a good way of describing it. We don't have unlimited resources. The government is there to stay. And they have all these people who feel a certain way that the law should be interpreted. And if you are arguing a point of law, they can argue another point of law and continue the process of protracted litigation. And they'll argue it again, another point of law. And then you have to have people come in and do surveys of your land or justify what you did through other ways. Maybe have the Army Corps of Engineers come in, or look at different acts that were done.
Right.
You need specialists to understand the way the acts were written originally, and they have changed over a period of 30 years, so you have to go back to the original intent of the Act and how it was changed and what changes were made and did it apply to you or not. That's a highly complex.
Bruce, we're going to have to ask you to hold that thought. We're going to go into commercial break. We'll pick it up on the other side.
Okay, you're welcome. Thank you.
This is The Micro Effect. www.themicroeffect.com.
You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
A mighty nation, blessed above all of creation. It was a rare and precious pearl, conceived in faith and liberty, home of the brave, land of the free. It was the envy of the world. But this shining city on a hill has turned from the Creator's will and let evil take control. Now the reckless men who lead them want to strip away their freedom and to steal their very soul. Now it's smoke and mirrors, switching bait, criticize and confiscate and let the guilty walk away. In this once righteous, godly nation, in the halls of education, they forbid a child to pray. They say we need to spread the wealth. They pretend to guard the health of the feeble and the poor, while the hand they hold behind their back confuses and conceals the fact that the wolf is at the door. There's an unseen hand.
Well, welcome back to Connecting the Dots with Apple. My guest today is Bruce Moran, and we are going to be joined in the second hour by Claire Lopez, and we are talking about the FISA warrant process, what the deep state is really all about, and what we can do as citizens and as taxpayers to try to help the president right this ship, because there's no question we are going down the wrong road, or have been for the last, really, Bruce, you say 30 years, it's probably been closer to 110 years. But the bottom line is we are going down the wrong road, and we need to turn this ship around if we are going to survive as a constitutional republic. And Bruce, you were alluding to, before we went into the break, that there are a lot of forces out there that are trying to make this really destroy our whole system of government and turn us into an administrative, technocratic deep state. So go ahead and continue with your thoughts on that, and and then we'll start building a little bit more information on what can happen if this investigation gets into the players that tried to take down the president. I really want to try to talk about that. So anyway, you go ahead and finish your thoughts, and let's go from there.
Okay, there is an administrative capacity of the interagency groups to work on policy and programs. If it's working counter to President Trump, then it gets pushed back from a triplet of agency programs. I'll give you an example. So the Department of Interior can be hooked into the Department of Commerce, to the Department of Justice, and they have interlinking lawyers and professionals working in those areas, and they could hold up President Trump's policy and programs. And that's why I was emphatic about saying we have 500 Class C positions that need to be put in place to counter these people. We have another 3,000 vacancies that need to be filled that haven't been filled in these departments and agencies. This will give the president at least a way and a means to counter what they're doing and to have his programs effectively worked out in tactical operations. You may see it happening in certain ways, but you will not see it happening in the tactical operations. They will say things are happening, but may not be happening. That's what I'm suggesting here. Now, in border security, you have the same situation. If you have more people on border security, then you have more people to check and cross-check. Say you add another 5,000 border security personnel there. You have 5,000 more to check and cross-check on what's not being done. So they can't go on and carry on their old ways. Some of them might be corrupt, working with the cartels. Some of them might be working with human trafficking. Some of them might just be corrupt to work with their own, local mayors. But whatever they're doing, the more people you put on the border, then you can put on more people from other departments and agencies too. The DEA, the ATF for arms running, different people. And that'll keep these other people in check and quell that pushback coming from all these different insidious networks that work in the informal sector, the underground economy, and the black market, including the drug cartels.
Yeah, no, I hear you, Bruce, and
pretty big.
One of the things that we've talked about, and I'd like you to really get into in some detail, is how the deep state players, they are a minority. I mean, it's not like the average American wants to destroy this country and destroy our Constitution and move into one world socialism. The average American in this country is painfully ignorant of what's going on in the rest of the world and in our world, and part of the reason for that is because we've got such a controlled media and we have so little solid information like you're giving us that people can hear and understand. And it's going to be really important that the silent majority, which we are very definitely a silent majority, quit being silent anymore.
Yeah, you don't have to be Republican or Democrat or independent. You have to be an American to understand that your individual rights and freedoms and your private property are under attack. And that's the critical part. How do you want to have your government run? What are the moorings of the Constitution you want protected, not usurped, undermined, or circumvented? That's the direction we want to go. We want to go in the way our founding fathers envisioned this country. Congress needs to do its job to have proper oversight, not politically leveraged oversight, not how I would talk about it as weaponized investigations. This is not the way we are geared. The founding fathers didn't understand that the executive branch would be as large as it is, and as many people as are there to push back on basic rights and freedoms that are needed for individuals. And that's where we need to understand that President Trump is moving in a different direction. I saw it grow in about 30 years to a way I felt really uncomfortable. And maybe Claire can weigh in on her perspective of what she sees and what she understands to be in different ways of her experiences.
Yeah, I don't know if Claire's on the call yet. We're waiting for her. She sent me a text message that she's running a little bit behind. She was on a flight from Texas back to her area, and she said that she would try to get on the call as quickly as she can. Claire, are you on the call yet? It doesn't sound like it, Bruce. Let's. I'm sure we'll. Joe McNeil, our producer director of the radio program will let me know as soon as Claire gets on the call. So let's talk about.
Okay.
Go ahead.
You can go, Dan. I had some other things to say, but I mean, if you have another topic you'd like me to address, that's good too.
Well, what I'm wondering, and I don't know how much you can talk about this, but it's been pretty obvious that it's been exposed. The Mueller investigation was really, the whole process was, it was, I think, bogus from the beginning. But the Mueller investigation came back with a finding of no collusion. But yet the liberal progressives won't drop it. They want to. I mean, I heard on the radio. I heard yesterday how they're saying, well, we know that there's something there, and we're going to find it. And we know that the Mueller report, we don't want anything redacted, even though probably if we get right down to it, it's pretty obvious to me that Hillary Clinton and certainly President Barack Obama had involvements that were totally improper in this thing. And we can look at Uranium One, we can look at any number of things that Hillary Clinton and the Clinton campaign did, including the payoffs by the DNC to Christopher Steele. And, this whole process is so bogus from top to bottom, yet they don't want to seem to drop it. Is there a way that the president can start to open up some of these investigations into the investigators?
That would be A.G. Barr, William Barr. I think what you could look at is a possible understanding that Peter Strzok was head of two different investigations. One was the Hillary Clinton email investigation, the server, unsecured server. The other one was the Russian collusion. Usually you don't have a federal agent in charge of two separate important critical investigations, and you would allocate that to other people. Then maybe you could look at that as being a conflict of interest. So in and of itself, and I believe it was disclosed that the Clinton bleach bit, from what I understood and saw at the time, was done right before a congressional hearing, before she was getting ready to be called. So that raises a red flag in and of itself. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was referring to, because there's so many things that happened on the other side of the side of the coin, and they've been whitewashed. They've been completely shoved under the rug.
Top secret skip information that was on her server, and it appears to be so. And there was a lot more there than they were that we were led to believe. I think that's what you're saying. And what was
Bruce,
it?
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. And the further we look, the further we dig, the worse it gets. And I guess my question is, when's the president going to be able to start fighting back?
Well, he has to fight back when he gets those 500 Class C appointments in and those 300 vacancies filled. And then it's up to Attorney General William Barr to move forward on various types of investigations where it may have been corrupted, where it may have been looked the other way, or one side justice applies here and the other side of justice doesn't apply there. That's what you're talking about. If those are obvious, and then you have to go into a whole series of what I would call inquiries to make discoveries to all these different people who worked on the investigations, the different agents that were in the field at that time. And like the Clinton Foundation, I think they went to Arkansas and up to their place in where they kept their private servers, and then they had it over at the State Department. So these kind of things, there are more than 4 or 5 agents, you're probably talking about a group of 30 or 40 agents that were involved in the entire process, and maybe more. So.
Yeah, we actually did a radio show. Oh, geez, now it's been probably a year and a half or 2 years ago, but we talked about how the laws are for the little people. If you're part of the deep state, you're part of the chosen few, they can literally get away with anything. They can do anything, and there are absolutely no repercussions to them. And that's certainly the Clintons are a perfect example of that. We've had Charles Ortel on our radio program talking about the forensic audits against the Clinton Foundation and how there's just a mountain of evidence that they've used that as a money laundering program just to be able to take care of their friends. This is the kind of stuff that keeps going on and on. We need to put an end to it. Bruce, do you have any ideas on what we can do?
I would say an investigation, an inquiry has to be made into what you said. If that kind of money laundering went on, where it went on, to what extent it went on. I can't make accusations against anybody, but there's a lot of questions I would say need to be answered if the investigation was skewed and they really never looked into the Clinton Foundation. And if that happened to go on, and what was the object of the Clinton investigation for, and what did the Clinton investigation actually do and not do, and what were the parameters for the Clinton investigation in the first place?
Right.
I mean, we looked at
what we're looking at is we're looking at a total double standard, and the thing is that they've done nothing but attack this president, and as far as I can tell, the biggest crime that this president has committed is being American sovereignty, American first, protect our country as a sovereign country. That's his biggest crime against humanity, and the globalists just absolutely detest him for that. But the globalists have been in charge for so many years that now they really own much of the administrative state in the United States, and we need to try to figure out a way to peel those layers back and make those people accountable.
That's what we're talking about, again, in the hiring of 500 Class C positions in 2000. That's like bringing in the cavalry first with the 500, then bringing in the soldiers to support the fort. You know, the cavalry comes in, scares the heck out of everybody, and then you bring in the soldiers to, clear out and get all the minefields out of there and stuff like that. That's what happened in Mosul. The guys working on that particular... ISIS had really strapped the west side of Mosul, and it took them, 6 months to get all the bombs out of there. Ambassador Hussein's mother was from there, and he was under post-traumatic stress. Good thing for President Trump that he went in there and he, got ISIS out of in the Caliphate State out of there, because that was their second headquarters. Their first headquarters was in Raqqa. So people don't realize how terrible it was. We're still having problems with the Christians over there, but I don't want to get into that part of the conversation. But that's part of things that people don't realize that are going on that President Trump is doing and trying to get a handle on, along with having to battle every day these people pushing back against all his policies. So, and programs too. So like I was saying, if he doesn't have enough people on the border, the people who are not following his policy and programs, along with the people who are working in the black market, the informal sector, and the underground economy, and not supporting his programs, they're making money on the side, that can all be stopped, or at least very limited, because you have people overseeing. You have checks, counter checks, and cross checks going on right away, 24/7. That's what people don't want. They don't want 24/7 border security, comprehensive border security. All these other things will start to go away.
Right. Well, I mean, I know that
And I'm with
there
my
has been
partners. Okay?
ample evidence that there's been a lot of bad actors that have come across the border, that have been part of international groups that are terrorist-based, and there's ample evidence that they've been coming across the border for the last 15, 20 years.
Yeah, it's very disturbing. Chuck and I, as you know, worked on the Secure Defense Act back in 2006. And the whole border comprehensive plan was never instituted at that time. Everybody played lip service. Some did some of this, some did some of that, but they never really did a comprehensive border security program like we wanted. If it was done back then President Trump would have an easy go because the policies would be in place. Congress is still not attuned to the correct border policies to having illegal aliens or immigrants come across. We are strapping those who are legally here trying to become citizens versus those coming across and sneaking across who automatically come across and they end up on our government programs, making $15,000, $20,000, $30,000 a year with food stamps and the other supportive services. That takes away from.
Yeah.
That takes away from our.
Bruce, it sounds.
Hello.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Bruce. I didn't mean to interrupt you. It sounds like Claire Lopez is on the call now, and I wanted to introduce Claire. She is Vice President for Research and Analysis at the Center for Security Policy. Claire's got an incredible background. I mean, she's been a CIA section chief. She's been involved with national and international intelligence for decades. And Claire, welcome to the radio program. We've been talking about the deep state. I know you have very strong feelings about the deep state as well. Please give our listeners maybe a little bit more background on what you're working on, and then let's talk about how this whole FISA warrant process, the disturbing facts that I think we see as part of this whole process that they're trying to bring down a president.
Hi, and thank you. Very glad to be with you. Apologize for a bit of a late joining here. Horrific traffic today in Washington, D.C. What else is new? But what we work on here at the center are issues related to national security in a lot of different ways. For instance, the crises in the Middle East, Islam, jihad, Sharia. We have just begun a new focus on the threat from communist China. And certainly we look at issues like the internal Islamic movement insurgency led by the Muslim Brotherhood inside the United States as well. So although we focus less on politics, we do focus on policy. We're a 501c3, a nonprofit organization, so there is that distinction. But those are some of the things we do, and I myself work a lot with our publications, the books, the monographs that you see at the Center's website, which is www.centerforsecuritypolicy.org, or a shorter URL is securefreedom.org, goes to the same place. So all of those books, the monographs, the occasional papers, or nearly all of them, I'm either author, co-author, and or editor for those. And then I get the privilege of coming on radio shows like these every now and then, too.
Well, we've had some great discussions over the past couple of years, and one of the things that becomes abundantly clear is that there are a lot of people who have been involved with our government, who have been involved with the security community, you included, including the CIA, that are not very happy with what's been happening as a result of, I would say, the previous two administrations, and really I think it went well back before that, but in the direction of our security agencies and how they're being used in misused in ways that are impacting our country and really destroying our constitutional republic as it stands. So would you, Claire, I'd love to hear your opinion about the last number of weeks with the Mueller investigation, the reports, and the FISA reports, and all this information, how you feel that this thing has really degenerated and the wheels are coming off the cart, and hopefully you'll give us a sense of a better direction.
Well, you know, the way I look at it, and I've heard this from other, commentators as well, analysts and observers, is that the opposition to candidate and then President Trump, with the most powerful tools of the United States government at their disposal, weaponized those tools against a private citizen and his presidential campaign, Donald Trump, and then continued when he was elected president because they didn't like the outcome. That's the long and the short of it.
Yeah, that's extremely short and well put. What can we do to expose just exactly what the deep state has done to our country, and how can we help this president to expose what the deep state is and why it's so important that we head the opposite direction?
Well, I don't know that we can actually do a whole lot in terms of exposing outside of comments and republishing or directing articles and so forth from some of the very top investigative journalists that have been involved for so long in uncovering what went on, and among those I would name Sarah Carter, of course, John Solomon, Greg Jarrett, certainly Sean Hannity, Judge Janine over at Fox 2. The best we can do, I think, is to give their pieces and their commentary extra dissemination and publicity. I mean, we're not the investigative journalists; they are. So I would look to them and to helping to disseminate what they uncover, which has been a terrific job by all of those just named.
Yes, you're right, Claire, but one of the problems that I see, and I see this happening around our world, is the fact that there are more of us that are in a position to disseminate that information than there are those who are part of the deep state that are in control of our media. We need to do a better job of making sure that this information is out there. I appreciate exactly what you're talking about because, frankly, we are fighting an uphill battle against a very deeply entrenched group.
Yes, certainly, and that is why these alternative outlets like yours, like radio, and like other outlets that are still available to us are so important. And thank you for, making that available to us to talk about it.
Well, you're quite welcome. Bruce has done a pretty good job of fleshing out the whole FISA process and how Christopher Steele and, the whole program was put together to try to, first of all, make sure that candidate Trump did not get elected and then try to bring him down after he was elected. And I don't think that process has slowed down, even though the Mueller investigation came back with a finding that there was no evidence of collusion. Let this thing drop. It looks to me like the lamestream media and the proponents of Never Trump are really working hard to try to cloud the evidence and to make it look a whole lot worse than than it ever was. What's your feeling on that?
Yes, I mean, the counter state might be a way to put this. It's still there, and we have to realize that and do our best to expose it.
Oh, Claire, what I was talking about was there are 500 Class C positions that have not been filled and 3,000 vacancies for the executive branch that need to be filled, and it hasn't been done. So in the last 2.5 years, those positions still remain open. Mitch McConnell had made a motion about a week ago that they're going to use the nuclear option to make sure these 500 Class C positions, these are undersecretaries, as you know, and for the executive branch throughout. And so 500 positions will help support the policy and programs of President Trump, along with the other 3,000 people that can go in there. He's also making reference to is the more people we have in place on the border security, where there is a lot of nefarious activities going on, the more we can counter them. Those also within the ranks of our border security who are on the take with the cartels. So the more people are there, the less opportunities they have to use the open borders as a way and means to conduct nefarious activities. So if we get another 5,000 people on the border, those are checks, cross-checks, and counter-checks with 24/7 operations going on. You won't be able to get away with stuff.
Yeah, definitely agreed. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, one of the things that disturbs me is the fact that the GOP and the establishment Republicans, the progressives that certainly are part of the party, have done such a poor job of trying to support this president. I'd love to hear both your opinions on that, because it's pretty obvious to me that our two-party system is failing because we are seeing a progressive takeover of both parties.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more. That's certainly the case, unfortunately.
Yeah, what I see is we do have some counterbalances coming in with Nunes starting to initiate 8 different types of inquiries to investigations. And then we have Lindsey Graham going to go forward on the FISA warrants. And then we have A.G. Barr coming in to look at other matters that may go into the spheres of intelligence gathering and things that happened before Operation Crossfire went into place, and how those may have been used as unmasking and as well as in the FISA courts, because as you saw, Samantha Powers was not aware of her name being used in an unmasking way. So we need to have those questions answered thoroughly to find out what was going on at that time, and maybe some of these things were used against Jeb Bush, Lindsey Graham, who were candidates themselves, and Ted Cruz. These are kind of things that we do not know, and if it goes to that level of weaponizing our government against candidates, then we have a huge problem here.
I agree. I have to ask this because both of you have been in one form of involvement with the various law enforcement agencies and national security groups, and I'd like to find out what your opinion is of how these groups were manipulated and how these groups were used to do a lot of illegal or unlawful activities, and what we can do to reform those agencies.
Well, I'll jump in. I mean, unfortunately, what happened is that individual political preferences among those who were apparently preferentially hired came to be institutional, politicized preferences, and that is simply a corruption of, the entire intent, the entire official purpose of these agencies. The only thing that can be done is overhaul them.
I agree, and actually, Claire, I guess my comment to Bruce earlier was that I see what's happened to the CIA, where they were actually doing clandestine investigations of the U.S. Senate without the Senate's knowledge, and that isn't the purpose of the CIA. That would certainly, if anything, that would be an FBI function. But that shows how far out of sync the whole process has become.
Yes, absolutely so, unfortunately.
Yeah, that was under John Brennan's directorship of the CIA. Yeah, he went in there and looked at records of the Senate Intelligence Committee. And Senator Udall at the time asked that he be fired. He was a Democratic senator at the time. Nothing was done.
Yeah, that's kind of amazing that sort of thing happens interagency. But I think we all recognize that the deep state has gotten as deep as it is because we've been asleep at the wheel. I think overall Americans have been way too complacent, and they've been way too trusting that somehow the right thing will always happen, and somehow justice will always be served. And I think it's time for average Americans to wake up to the reality, is if we're not part of the solution, we're part of the problem. Claire, I want to get you more involved in this discussion, because you weren't part of the first hour and 20 minutes or so. Tell us about some of the things that you've been involved with that are exposing some of the areas of the deep state, and what some of the findings are that your group is coming up with, and then maybe some of the things that you would like to see changed.
Well, I'd have to say that that's not an area of focus for the Center for Security Policy per se. Obviously, we've just discussed what really needs to be changed, and that is essentially, in a nutshell, the depoliticization of our national security, national intelligence community, and its return to nonpartisan professional standards.
Yeah, probably the best thing we can do is start to migrate away from politicians and start electing more statesmen. That certainly would be a step in the right direction.
Well, you look at different things in different ways, and Claire is suggesting that we have to overhaul our investigative agencies and make sure that you have proper and fitting people are dedicated to protecting our national security. That is first, America first in that way. We have many patriots that are in positions, but they get bypassed because of they're not political. Now, back in the earlier years in the previous administration, we saw 197 professionals in 5 years being purged from the military. So the military back then was starting to be politicized and weaponized in a way where it wasn't forthcoming to actually, that's 40, 50 career officers, the admirals and generals fired. So I found that to be a telltale sign that the government was moving in a political manner directed by a commander-in-chief.
I think we'd have to look at each one of those cases on an individual basis. Some of them probably very well deserve to be fired, others perhaps not.
Yes, I agree. There were some abuse cases or, causes for that, but 197 in 5 years, that's many more than normally happens. I agree with that, Clint.
Yeah, and folks, I see our military, for the most part, being extremely patriotic. Most of the general officers and people who are really part of the leadership of our military, I think for the most part they're patriotic, God-fearing Americans that believe in our system and would like to see it go back to being somewhat non-political and being used for what it was intended for, and that's really a defensive military that is here to protect our country. It's become politicized because, frankly, our top leaders have taken their position of power to mean that they can modify things and turn us into a totally different nation than what our founders envisioned. I want to maybe ask both of you, what is the best way to communicate all this information and get the whole process shifted in the right direction? Because that's the key to this whole thing. We've talked about it a little bit, but there's got to be a way that we can get our country back on track and do it in a way that we enlist all the support of these various patriots that seem to really be a large part of our government. They've just been silent too long.
Yes, there is a responsibility to being a citizen of this country. It's not a passive occupation. It demands both education and engagement in our political process.
I agree, and the education is a huge part of it. We've watched our schools turned into social experiments, and they no longer teach history and the 3 R's. They teach a lot of things that are really counterproductive to us having an educated and intelligent group of young citizens who are deductive reasoners, people who actually make good decisions. That's changed a bunch too, and that certainly is education's a huge part of that. Bruce, you've had to do battle with many of these groups over the years. I know you've got to be somewhat careful in how you approach some of these things, but you're right there in the middle, just like Claire. You see what's going on around us. How can our listeners really be part of the solution to help turn this ship around?
They have to elect officials that are going to support the Constitution and protect the United States of America. That's the bottom line. And protect the values that we grew up with. It's a whole different idea. Fabianism, education, has been a change in the society, and that kind of deterioration in the critical thinking methods, I call it liberal classical education that's taught only in certain universities now, like St. John's, St. Olaf's, and maybe you can throw Oberlin in there, but we're losing our ability to teach and to ask the proper and fitting questions, and to make sure that those questions are always answered and you're able to express yourselves from the First Amendment. As you saw, there are a lot of young people in universities that are being suppressed from talking about their ideas because other students feel that they can't talk counter to what their belief system is. And that's not healthy at all. You got to be able to have a dialogue. You need to answer questions. You need to debate. Our country is about First Amendment and the ability to debate. I was with somebody, and he started agreeing with me right away. I said, I don't want you to agree with me. I want you to reason out what you're thinking and not just agree with me. I want you to think it through. And because who I am and what I do, I said, that doesn't help me. You got to be able to tell yourself, to talk to yourself and reason it out in your own mind. And if you agree with me, yeah, you got to know why I'm reasoning it out and thinking about it, and understand why I love my country, and and I believe in God and things of that sort. Those are the things each of us have to work out. But then we need a dialogue, a creative, active, moving dialogue that's helpful for everybody to voice their opinions. And we don't have that. It's been sidetracked. As Claire knows, there's psychops being used and things of that nature, which, that kind of thing is a deterioration of our system. Those are kind of things that were used years and years ago by communist states and fascist states. Those kind of indoctrination methods, or you can call it Fabian society, slowly moving through curriculums. Those kind of thinking processes have to be changed, and they're insidiously affecting the way all of us are communicating with each other, or not communicating, or people just ignore you when you try to address those issues. So that's kind of we're at a standpoint where we need to engage each other openly instead of let the media, talking heads, tell us what's going on. They tend to organize things and only bring people who are within their guidelines of what they want to justify and rationalize to be their case and ideological base. I don't know.
Yeah, no, you're right.
I live in an area where
Bruce.
there's 5 universities and colleges, so I get all kinds of input. So, and I see things happening all the time.
Mm-hmm. Well, Claire was mentioning, that they're doing studies on, what's happening in places like communist China. And we had some information that was sent to me by a friend of mine last week, and it was put out by the World Health Association or organization, and it showed that of the 500 most polluted cities in the world, that the United States did not have one. That we weren't listed in the top 500 polluted cities in the world, yet communist China was listed as one of the worst polluters. They have over 250 of the top 500 cities in pollution are in communist China, yet they're the darling of the UN, and they seem to get a free pass, and yet they go after President Trump and after the United States as the world's big polluter. How in the world do they get away with this, Claire?
Well, they don't. And this is precisely why President Donald Trump pulled the United States out of the Paris Climate Accords, because the United States was going to be footing the bill while places like communist China were going to continue polluting. And that was just not a tenable situation, and so he pulled us out. So we are holding, the president is holding China to account on that regard, but at the broader level, as you say, exactly, the United Nations level and elsewhere, Paris Climate Accords, people involved in that as well, they're not holding them to account, but we are.
Well, I think that's important that we do that, but our media seems to do a very, very poor job of arguing the president's case. They're constantly arguing for the other side, and that's the part that's so disturbing. We also, and this was another piece of information that was given to me, that big Texas-sized patch of plastics that are out in the Pacific Ocean that are being blamed on plastic bottles and the six-pack holders and that sort of thing, that only 8% of those that plastic in that trash field, if you call it that, are actually those kind of plastics. Most of them are discarded fishing gear, and over 20% is trash that blew out when the Japanese when the hurricane hit, the earthquake hit, and they had the tsunami wave that hit Japan. And when they actually track down the top polluters, China, Indonesia, Sri Lanka, Philippines, I mean, there's these groups that are the top polluters. The United States, again, isn't even listed anywhere in the top polluters, but yet we get all the crap.
Sure. I mean, this is why the Paris Climate Accords were so unfair, and why President Donald Trump deserves so much credit for pulling us out of it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, he needs credit for that. Well, I want to give both of you a chance to kind of give a little bit of information on projects that you're working on, so that our listeners can have an opportunity to check you out a little further and follow some of your programs. Claire, I put a link on our announcement to your Center for Security Policy, but I know you're involved with a lot of different groups. Tell our listeners how they can maybe find out more about things you're working on.
Well, certainly, thank you. The Center for Security Policy, where, as I mentioned earlier, we have lists and links to all of our publications, books, monographs, occasional papers, also videos, short videos, and also Frank Gaffney's daily radio show. Typically on a regular business day, Frank will interview 4 people in an hour-long program. Sometimes he'll devote the entire hour to one person, but you can find all of that at the website. Let me mention another group with which I work, and that is John Guandolo's Understanding the Threat at understandingthethreat.com. First of all, the group is the one and only in the country that really takes training about the Islamic movement, jihad, Sharia, the Muslim Brotherhood, and the overall Islamic movement, which is really led by the Muslim Brotherhood, but not limited to it by any means, takes that kind of training to the local level, because that's where we think an insurgency such as we're facing domestically is really best and most effectively countered. And so we focus, John and the UTT team focus on bringing this education to private citizens, especially faith community leadership, and also local law enforcement, sheriff's departments, police departments at the local level, because they're the ones on the front lines in law enforcement and also in reaching good numbers, large numbers of ordinary everyday Americans. So understandingthethreat.com, that website, by the way, also has a lot of resources. For example, many links to documents of the Muslim Brotherhood that were captured in the 2004 raid on that home in Annandale, Virginia, belonging to Ismail Barassi, the archivist of the U.S. Muslim Brotherhood, and then those documents used, of course, in the 2008 Holy Land Foundation Hamas terror funding trial. So many, many resources there. You can sign up also for a newsletter daily, by the way, both from the Center for Security Policy. Neglected to mention that. Click on the tab at our website for a daily newsletter, and also a daily, it actually might not be daily, it might be more like weekly, I think, perhaps, from John Guandolo's team at UTT. So have a look at both of those. And I'll mention one other, and that is the Citizens Commission on National Security. We are the successor group, and many of the same people involved, as with the Citizens Commission on Benghazi earlier. So I'll recommend all 3 of those to you. Thank you.
And Claire, can you mention CARE and their relationship to the Muslim Brotherhood?
Well, of course, CARE was founded by the top 3 Hamas officials in the United States at the time. Nihad Awad at that time, and still now today, the executive director of CARE. Abu Marzouk, who has now sometime since left the United States, gone back to the Middle East, I think probably Egypt or maybe elsewhere in the Middle East, and then Rafiq Jaber, who also has left the United States. But those were the top 3 Hamas officials in the United States in 1994, by the way, not after 9/11, 1994, when CARE was officially organized to be the U.S. branch of Hamas, offshoot of Hamas, which itself is the Palestinian branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. But those founders wanted to put some distance between the Hamas name, which already at that time was on and remains on today, the U.S. Foreign Terrorist Organizations list, and this new organization, CARE, which does not do terrorism, neither does the Muslim Brotherhood. They don't do terrorism, but they have a different mission, and that mission is subversion, which in my mind is way, way more dangerous to our republic, more threatening than terrorism could ever be. So that is CARE, and unfortunately, an awful lot of our senior leadership in national security as well as Congress don't seem to understand who and what CARE is, or perhaps they do, and that's an even worse thought. But for example, the Investigative Project on Terrorism, Steve Emerson's group, published not that long ago a whole series of 100 and I think over 100 letters of praise and support for CARE written by our members of Congress. Okay? I'll repeat that. Over 100 of our members of Congress. There are 535 of them altogether, more than 100. So that is nearly 20% of Congress wrote letters of support and praise for CARE, Hamas, in America. We got a lot of work to do.
We do. We've got a lot of work to do. I really appreciate you joining us, Claire, for this last hour. Thank you for your part in that. Bruce, very quickly, give our listeners a little bit of quick information on how they can keep tabs on you.
We're working on projects that are related to border security and, say, this particular issue you're talking about on the FISA courts. We submit information in and help round out opinions about what we think can be done to help support the President of the United States and the administration. We're working with the GSA. Chuck is working directly with them, providing various cybersecurity, SIN, methods for protecting our country. We're working on the border security directly through Chuck, because he's in Washington. I work on supportive efforts. When I go there, I work directly on the genocide in Iraq. We work with Ambassador from the Iraq Embassy. We work on different programs. We're usually not known. We will talk about it once we're able to disseminate information what you think is important in America and people need to know about.
Okay, Bruce, thank you. Thank you, Claire. We've run out of time, but I ask our listeners to please join us again next week to connect the dots.